Hey guys, welcome. Oh, that's a lot of junior hires. Everyone look, that's a lot of junior hires. Oh my gosh, half of you just left. Well, there should be space now, spread out, okay? Relax a little. Doing something right there. Tanner's looking at me. Okay, let's focus. Hey, Pastor John's out of town, and we miss him. And my whole life, people have told me I sound exactly and look exactly like him. So if you squint your eyes, you can pretend that he's still here, okay? We are in week 4 of a series going through 1st and 2nd Samuel. It's been incredible, and I want to encourage you to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 18. And the series has been called Rise and Fall. By the way, AJ, Next Gen Pastor, now we've met. Let's keep going. The series is called Rise and Fall, and it's talking about the rise and fall of Saul and even David as kings. And there's a lot of really cool stuff happening. And we really reach this week, which you're about to read it in your daily devotional if you're going through it with us, which is available online if you want to start, is David and Goliath. You guys have heard that story before, right? And there's some of the most famous stories in all of Scripture are going to be in this next week's reading. And so I'm really excited about it. The title of this morning's message is The Relational Bonding Agent. The Relational Bonding Agent. I'm going to get into a lot of what God has to say about friendships and how we interact with each other in the church. And I'm really looking forward to it this morning. There are some social dynamics in 1st and 2nd Samuel that are incredible, that they can make TV shows and movies about. It's wonderful. We're going to lean into it this morning. I want to first tell a story. Has anyone ever been to Liberty Station Public Market? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, you guys are familiar. It's awesome, right? It's almost as crowded, and there's people everywhere. And it's essentially what it's set up is like, imagine just like a giant market with a whole bunch of different like kitchens, and all there is in front of it is a little kiosk, and you can go to probably 30 different places and get food or snacks. It's really great. And so we are going on a double date with my wife and Colton and Annie. You know Colton, he runs the youth ministry here at the Grove. I'm going to tell them how many junior hires we have. We're on a double date there, and we're hanging out, and we're walking, and we're kind of deciding. My wife and I have very different appetites when it comes to where we want to eat. And so she split off from me. She's somewhere else. I'm walking with Colton and Annie, and we're walking, and we see this one kiosk. It's in a Mexican restaurant with $5 steak quesadillas, and I was sold at $5. And so I stop, and I'm like, hey, do you guys want anything? And they're both like, no, and they kind of giggle, and I'm like, whatever. And I go up, and I order. I'm like, hey, I want 2 of those, and I pay. And Colton and I are in the middle of a deeply important, significant conversation. Like, we are passionately enthralled in conversation and about fantasy football, and so I'm distracted. And so have you ever ordered something and you're kind of trying to do 2 things at once, like talk and order, and then, so I'm doing that, and I look back, and both Colton and Annie are looking at me with that smirk. You know that smirk when people look at you where you would typically go, like, what's wrong? People look at me that way all the time, so I just kind of blow past it. Like, I'm just used to it at this point. So they look at me with smirks, and I don't care. I order my food, and I walk back, and I'm like, what? And he says, turn around. And I turn around, and there are 15 people in line to order at that restaurant that I had just cut without knowing. And I literally just disappeared in the crowd, right? Because they are all looking at me. Which is amazing on a number of levels. One, no one said anything. Who would have said something? I would have been like, young man, no. Like, do you not see this line? Like, I would have said something. The crazy thing is that, so I order, and they're slow, okay? Like, people waiting a long time. 5 minutes later, they're like, AJ, we have your food. And I'm like, Colton, can you please go get it for me? Colton's like, no, you made your bed. You're going to go get it. Colton's one of those friends who likes to see his friends suffer. You know those friends? So he never said anything. I was over there ordering, and it wasn't like, AJ, you're cutting the line. He was just like, let's see if AJ gets beat up. This is awesome. And so being cut is the worst. How many of you guys agree? Like, being skipped is the worst. I hate lines. Are any of you guys with people in Disneyland when that person's like, oh, my family's up there. And you're like, but you're back here, buddy. Like, you can see them later when you get off the ride, but you're not coming any farther, right? I love those people. I'm not brave enough, but I'm like, thank you. You know, I was recently at a discount tire, and I was there for the longest time, and was watching other people who came in after me get their tires and leave. And finally, after 3 people, I got frustrated. And I went and said, hey, what's happening? And they explained to me why they're trying to ruin my life. And I was just so frustrated. because I'm like, I'm in line and I'm being skipped and I'm frustrated about it. I would see their cars and I'm like, anyways, whatever. Being skipped is the worst. And we're going to talk about a guy named Jonathan. Now, Jonathan gets skipped. Jonathan is the son of King Saul in Israel at the time. And yet King Saul gets the kingship taken away from him, that it's not going to continue down his family line, rather that God is going to choose someone else to be king when Saul dies. Now, Jonathan is the prince. He's the crown prince, which meant that he's the eldest son and that he would be the next in line to be king. But if you know the story, he gets skipped by a guy named David. And we're going to really ask ourselves this. David and Jonathan should have been mortal enemies, yet bonded together in the deepest form of friendship. And we're going to ask why. Why did Jonathan and David become friends when they really and truly should not have been friends? Because the person who Jonathan was getting passed up for, was David. We're going to turn to 1 Samuel. We're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 18, like I said, and we're going to start with verses 1 and 2. But first, I want to give you a little bit of context, a story you've probably heard of called David and Goliath. I'm willing to bet you've heard of it, okay? It's a well-known story, and I almost feel like I don't need to go into it, all right? There's this Philistine giant, and David's a 15-year-old and kills him. It's so cool. If you don't know it, where have you been? Like, you got to look it up, okay? Also, you got to read it. It's an incredible story. But what we're going to read is we're going to spend a ton of time on David for the next, 6 weeks. What I want to do right now is focus on his closest friend and really ask ourselves these questions about Jonathan and all the social dynamics that are intertwined in this unique relationship. Let's keep going. We're going to pick it up just in chapter 17 to just kind of finish at the end of when David kills Goliath. We pick it up here. And as soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. He killed Goliath, chopped Goliath's head off with his sword, and brought the head back. It's awesome. It's in the Bible. You can't get mad at me for saying it, okay? Verse 58. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." And as soon as he had finished, and I want you to underline that if you have your Bibles out, because our whole message is really wrapped around this sentence. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. I love and hate some of the words that are said here. Gentlemen, doesn't this idea of your soul being knit to someone else's seem so weird? Like, keep your knitting away from my knitting. Like, let's create a clear separation. But I want to explain what this looks like and why it's incredibly unique to me, because the truth is Jonathan and David were some unlikely friends. They should not have been friends, and I want to explain to you why. Jonathan was the lastborn son. David was the lastborn son of a father, a farmer, who lived out in the forest, where Jonathan was the firstborn son of a king. They lived in completely different cities. David grew up outside with little, and Jonathan grew up probably in some really nice palace or some nice house with whatever he needed at his beck and call, right? He's a prince. And Jonathan is actually believed to be at least 5 years older than David. Are you with me? And you might think that's not a big deal, but how many of you guys know that if you're a junior in college, your best friend is probably not a sophomore in high school, right? It's a little bit of a gap. Maturity gap and age, all that stuff. And so these two are not really the people you would think would be close friends. In fact, I'm going to take it even deeper. I'm willing to bet, and I'm pretty confident, this is not the first time that Saul meets David. And there's something unique about in this moment, that it's this particular moment that Jonathan decides to sacrifice or knit his soul to David, basically to treat his own life like it was David, or to put himself underneath David. Why in this moment does he do that? Because it wasn't the first time he had met David. Go with me to 1 Samuel chapter 16. One of the things I love about 1 and 2 Samuel is it's chronological, right? Ever read Isaiah and Ezra and been like, what is happening? Are we in the future? Like, what's going on? It's so simple. Just go back 2 chapters with me and read something in chapter 16. You see, King Saul had been having these fits of anger, and one of the servants said, "Hey, let's get that guy David. He plays the harp really well. Let's see if it makes him feel better." And we pick it up here. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. Now again, this is before David and Goliath. Are you with me? that David actually had a relationship with Saul. I think often we read David and Goliath in isolation. We think that that's the first time David and Saul meet, but this is not true. And Saul sent to Jesse saying, let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight. And whenever that the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre, which is a harp, and played it with his hands. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him. This is incredibly fascinating. So David and Jonathan have little in common, and they've literally already met each other. Why in this moment? And the reason why I want to argue that Jonathan's already met David is if you had a dad who would get these crazy fits of anger and rage, and this other person came and played music for him that calmed him down, you would probably know that person existed, correct? Also, if that person became your dad's armor bearer, who's roughly the same age as you-ish, kind of, you would probably know he exists. Are you with me? I really highly doubt that it's the first time that Jonathan ever saw David. Then why? We ask ourselves, why in this moment does such an extreme thing has happened that he says he sees David, and after David's done talking, he knits his soul to David? I want to answer this question on what the heck does knitting one's soul to the other person mean? It's so strange. Again, it feels icky. Like, have you ever seen someone knit? I don't know. It doesn't seem fast, but you kind of imagine the imagery of these two things coming together. What are we talking about? I think Paul, he writes in the book of Philippians, he's writing to this church in Philippi, and he says something that I think is what is meant when it says that Jonathan knit his soul to David. If you turn to Philippians 2, verse 1, it says this. So if there are any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, get this, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. The NIV says it this way. It says, then making my joy complete, being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one in mind. That is what we're talking about when we're saying that Jonathan knit his soul, is he saw this man and he loved him as himself because he saw a love for Christ, a love for Jesus, a love for the Lord. I'll explain to you this way. Colton, you guys know him. I just told you the story about him. He's on staff here, runs our youth ministry. And before he ran the youth ministry, I did. And it was a lot of fun, except overnighters. Have you ever been to overnighters? It's where you take all the junior hires, like 75 junior hires. And if you've seen the Gremlins, it's basically that, like, if you're curious. Instead of water, they get sugar, and then everything changes, and they're different people. And there's a picture of Colton and I in 2015 at 3 a.m, just losing our minds. I don't know why that's on my head. I don't know why Colton's sitting on a medicine ball. I don't know. But all I know is 3 a.m, and we're literally like, I don't love these kids anymore. Like, parents, how do you do it? And so Colton and I really are, we barely knew each other in high school at all, but our friendship really bonded when we started to do youth ministry together. And there's something I noticed about Colton is that he loved the kids just as much as I did. And as someone who deeply loved his junior hires, seeing someone else who did, man, did it draw us together. I looked up to him, I respected him. I was so immensely appreciative of him because he would do whatever it takes to love his junior hires. He would drop off 4 or 5 junior hires every Friday night and pick them up. And I don't know, there's a better way to love your youth pastor than that. I was so immensely grateful. And so when it came time for us to find out who was going to take over the junior high ministry, there was no question who it was going to be. Because there was this guy who was of the same accord, the same mind. I'm not saying our souls were knit together. Gross. It's Colton. Keep that away. What I am saying is that, man, we were of the same mind and the same love for these kids. Are you guys with me? That's what we're talking about when it says that they were bonded together. Jonathan and David had little in common and had already known each other, yet why in the specific moment did Jonathan knit his soul to David? You see, Jonathan heard another young man completely devoted to serving God, and he thought to himself, that's just like me. Now, one of the crazy things about Jonathan, you have to know this, is that he is an amazing, mighty man of God. He would have made an awesome king, in my opinion, but maybe not better than David. But just some context, I think one of the most underrated stories in Scripture is a story we read earlier this week when Jonathan goes and sneaks away from his dad with his armor bearer when the Philistines are coming, and 2 people go and fight 30,000 Philistines with 30,000 chariots. and they defeat him. And it's incredible. If you know the story, you should read it. It's wonderful. David is with him and his armor bearer, and he says, God, do you want us to go attack them? And basically, he does this little thing where the Lord confirms it, and him and his armor bearer charge this army of people that are encamped in this garrison, and they defeat him because the Lord does a mighty miracle, and the earth quakes, and there's thunder, and all the Philistines start fighting each other. And it was because of the boldness of Jonathan that the Philistines were defeated that day. There's some fascinating social dynamics. Ask yourself this question. Then where was Jonathan when Goliath was taunting? I don't think Jonathan was afraid. I think Jonathan what do you think is more scary? 30,000 people with chariots or just a 9-foot tall guy? I'll tell you, I'll take the 9-foot tall guy 10 times out of 10. I'll still probably lose 10 times out of 10. But at least I got a shot. At least I can get lucky with the stone. Not that it was lucky. It was the Lord. Let me be careful. I'm sorry. Whoa. I felt like I just said heresy there, and I just want to be careful. It was not luck. But at least you got a fighting chance. I don't know. Maybe he gets a heart attack while he's running at you. I don't know. 30,000 people against Jonathan and his armor bearer is the definition of a suicide mission. So I don't think Jonathan is saying, I'm too scared, because he wasn't too scared then. I think if you go back to the story where Jonathan goes to fight the Philistines, it said that he snuck away without telling his dad. I think Jonathan knew that his dad said, I think Jonathan said, I'll do it. And his dad said, heck no, you're too important. You're the prince. You're not going to go. I also think that Jonathan said, I'm too scared. I'm not going to let you show me up. He'd already had that happen once before when Saul was hiding in the hills when Jonathan had that victory. So when we see that David speaking, he's talking about what he did in the victory with Goliath, and Jonathan hears it, you can tell deeply that he's like, you're like me. Are you with me? He's connected. He's saying, I've done that. We're of like-minded. You're like me. And it's not a selfish thing. He heard David talk, and he said, I love the Lord the way that you love the Lord. And it was incredible. David Guzik, he writes this. Jonathan heard David give an extended explanation of his heart, his faith in the living God, and Jonathan knew that he and David had the same heart. They could not be such close friends until Jonathan knew that about David. And here's my main point I want to talk today is that there's nothing more powerful to bring people together like a love and devotion for Christ. There's nothing more powerful. In fact, the gospel is stronger than anything that seeks to separate. That actually we have this incredible thing in the context of the church and in the context of God's people where we have this thing that connects us monumentally, exponentially more than anything that could divide us. And that's why if you look around the room, look at all these people. You would not hang out with them if it wasn't for us being here together. Would you really want to hang out with them? No, just kidding. You look awesome. You probably want to hang out with me, but that's another story. There's this idea that we often miss. Like put it this way, one of the last things we let people know about us is usually if we love God or not. When we meet people, we want to keep that a secret because we don't want it to offend. Or we don't want people to reject us. And that very thing is the most powerful thing to bond. Have you ever been on an airplane and been sitting next to someone and talking to them? All the introverts are like, no, never have. But extroverts, you know what I'm talking about. Sitting next to them and you're talking and you find out they're a Christian, there's something that happens. You go, no way, me too. And there's this kinship that comes. And yeah, I often think we hide it. We don't use it. We don't lead with it because, man, what if someone doesn't like us because of it? Then I'd say, do you really want that friendship in the first place? But what if, we'll keep going. The gospel is stronger than anything that seeks to separate. It's stronger than culture. It's stronger than socioeconomic background, than race, than politics, than language. Think about missions work. When people go and do missions work to people who don't even speak the same language, and yet when they're both Christians, how powerful is it? My dad told me when he did missions work in Cuba, he doesn't even speak the language, and he's preaching, and someone has to interpret it, and the presence of God fell. If I'd had a friend who we had to interpret everything all the time, we probably wouldn't stay friends, because that would be exhausting. Some of you guys are like, I have one. That's great, whatever. There's this idea that the gospel is so immensely powerful that it can bring us together, and I think we've missed it as a church, and so we don't bring it to the forefront. The gospel is the relational bonding agent that can overcome any obstacle. Yet we often assume so many things that keep us from relationships. We often go, they're different than me, therefore we wouldn't like each other. I worked at Starbucks. I feel like all my stories are GCU, Starbucks, or Colton. But I worked at Starbucks for a long time while I was finishing school. And when I just started, me and another girl got hired at the same time. Because we had different schedules, she worked most nights, I worked most mornings. We actually didn't meet each other until like about 5-6 weeks into working together. And the whole time before we met each other, everyone I'd worked with, who would work with both of us just separately, always said, "Oh my gosh, you guys are so different." I was a Christian. I was a pastor's son and a part-time youth pastor who never cussed. And this girl cussed like a sailor. Okay, she has tattoos on every inch of her body, and her part-time job was working at a dispensary, okay, which I later found out was her house, okay? So, yeah, I don't know, sketchy. So the entire time I'm working there, everyone, like all week, I was so stressed out. I mean, all month long, they're like, everyone would say, "You guys are so different." Constantly, "You guys are so different." And so I was so stressed out. And finally, the time came where we were scheduled for the same time. I got the 2 hours before she was scheduled to work, and I'm scheduled to work before. And the whole time, both shift managers are like, "You're going to meet so-and-so today." And everyone was like laughing. And I am stressing out, right? Because I'm like, is this girl going to attack me? And they're telling me all this crazy stuff about her. And I am like, man, what's going to happen? And then the time comes, and I'm actually a little nervous. The time comes, she walks in the door, and this girl looks like a pirate. Like, I'm not kidding, okay? And she walks in, and everyone kind of stops, and she walks right up to me, and that is how I met my wife, Maddie. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. If you know Maddie, she's nothing like that. Just kidding. But it's actually pretty crazy. This girl walks up to me, and I'm ready to, like, defend myself. I'm ready to be like, "Yes, I'm a Christian." I don't know. I'm ready. And she walks up, and she puts out her hand and says, "Hey, I'm so-and-so. Let's be friends." And it blew my mind because I was ready to be enemy. And this is so wicked, right? I had heard so much that she was so different that I was ready to defend and go to war for what I believed or whatever. And she had heard all the same things about age is this and it's to be so different than you. And this girl who doesn't even love Jesus just came and she knew not to assume when I did. And she simply just said, "Hey, let's be friends." And the truth is we became, not best friends, but really I was closer with her than anyone else in the whole store. I did not agree with a single life decision she ever made. But I really respected how she did not want to let that separate our relationship. We became good friends. Just to clarify, that is not my wife, okay? I'm really worried that someone's going to take that and then see Maddie and be like, "Is this your second wife?" Like, I'm confused. All right, let's keep going. Just to clarify. Because here's the deal. The world tries to get you to hate those who are different than you. And the world will try and get me to hate those who are different than me. And it's the effectiveness of the enemy to say they're different, you won't get along. But is that not the opposite? The opposite of what Christ teaches and preaches and his desire. In fact, he gave us this incredible thing called the gospel and a mutual love for Christ that can overcome any of that stuff. So start thinking about those coworkers who you're like, "We can never get along." Oh, really? What if they... No, we got to keep going. All right, hold on. I love one of our values is we think three because you'll see today, pay attention, all generations talking to each other. And I don't see that anywhere else in the world than church. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, one of my favorite authors and an incredible pastor, he pastored during a time when Nazi Germany was taking over Germany and slowly turning the culture. And that's when he was a pastor, and that's when he wrote a lot of this stuff. He wrote a book called Life Together, one of the most effective books on Christian community I've ever read. And he says this: "The more genuine and the deeper our community becomes, the more will everything else between us recede. The more clearly and purely will Jesus Christ and his work become the one and only thing that is vital between us." You can see someone who is so different than you, and yet if you have this singular thing together where you love the Lord, it is big enough to overcome all those things. Are you tracking with me? How incredible is this? We do not operate like this in the church today. In fact, how many different churches don't get along, right? Okay, there's a study done by this guy named Jeffrey Hall, and this is what he found out in a study, that it takes 50 hours to move from acquaintance to casual friends, 90 hours from casual friends to like a simple friendship, and 200 hours to be bonded as good friends, best friends. Are you with me? And all the introverts in the room are going, "It takes way more than 200 hours. What are you talking about?" all the extroverts are like, give me 15 minutes and I'm there, And I want to tell this story again, talking about GCU. I went to school there, and if you've ever gone away to college the first year, freshman year, it's just crazy because no one knows anyone, and you're just exhausted, pretending to be someone the whole time, and everyone's fake. It's the worst. Go to school; it's great. But like, I hated it, and the people I hung out with the first 2 weeks, I did not get along with until I met this guy named Taylor Downey. And I remember that day I called my dad and said, dude, I miss home. I don't like it here. Everyone's fake. Like, I'm over this. And we just prayed on the phone. And that day, we were both part of the scholarship thing. And I met Taylor Downey. And we just got to talking. And I found something out. I found out that he was interning at his church in the youth ministry. And I thought, oh, awesome. And then I said, hey, let's hang out. I want to ask you about that. And we started connecting. He started telling me that one day he wants to be a youth pastor. And that his pastor, John, and I was like, my pastor's John. It's also my dad. Like, we just started bonding. And it really reminded me of the Jonathan and David thing because I was just so exhausted. But here I was hearing a young man who was fully sold out for the Lord. And I just thought to myself, and again, this isn't out of pride. I just thought, that's like me too. And oh my gosh, 200 hours became 2 hours because I found someone who loved the Lord, was passionate about Jesus, and I was so desperate for it. And so when we connected, we became so close so quickly because we were both looking for it. Here's what I want to say. If you're watching online or you're here today, and if you're having a hard time feeling lonely and you're feeling like you need more friendships and deeper relationships, there's no better place than the church to create and cultivate those friendships. It really and truly is, and here's why. The thing that you assume will keep everyone from wanting you around is nothing compared to the relational bonding agent that is the gospel. And so that part of you're going, if I really opened up, if I really let people know who I genuinely was, they would kick me out of church and not want them here. Understand, it pales in comparison. It is nothing to a mutual love of Jesus. And when you see someone else who loves Jesus like you, I'll show you this way. Have you ever had someone confess anything to you? Hey, I just want to confess, and they pour out their heart in something. You feel so close to them after. You don't feel like, oh, I don't want to be friends with you anymore. You feel a kinship because, wow, they opened up to you, right? There is such space and some amazing, genuine relationships for you if you truly get involved in church. Because if you are pursuing God of one mind, I know that you'll meet other people like that, and you have no idea how powerful the bond is when you both love Jesus and how it can pull you in the same direction. If you are hurting for relationships and friendships, I'm telling you, this is the answer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, again in his book, Life Together, he says this: I can no longer condemn or hate a brother for whom I pray, no matter how much trouble he causes me. He understood something. Is when you're praying for someone else, man, you love them. Let's finish the story in 1 Samuel 18. We're going to read more about what Jonathan does, and it's incredible. Then Jonathan made a covenant. Underline that if you have your Bibles. Made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of, and underline this, the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and even his bow, and his belt. Jonathan's sitting there in his underwear. It's like a weird friendship connection, right? Like, hey, I'm going to take off everything and give it to you. And David was like, not everything, please not everything, right? Like Jonathan takes off the stuff, and let's finish the story. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul sent him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. You see, Jonathan made a covenant. Why? I want to ask, what is that covenant he's making? And here's the point I want to make. Run with me with this. Whose robe was given? Jonathan's, right? Whose robe is given to David? Jonathan. Who is Jonathan? Jonathan is the crown prince, the heir to the throne. Are you with me? What do robes symbolize in ancient history and in the Bible? Royalty. I'll just show it to you really quick. Revelations 1:13, it says this, and it's talking about Jesus as king. And among the lampstand was someone like the Son of Man dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet and with a golden sash around his chest. On his robe, and this is chapter 19, 16, again, just painting the picture. On his robe and on his thigh, he has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Do you remember what they put on Jesus to mock him when he was dying on the cross? They put a crown of thorns and they put a purple robe on him. Because robes symbolize something in ancient history and in biblical scripture, and that is royalty. You see, I think we miss this, but in this moment, Jonathan, I think is the very first person, because again, David is the anointed king. David knows he's going to be king, but outside of David and Samuel and his whole family, no one else knows. And I think this is the first moment where Jonathan says to David, "It is you, not I, who will be the next king of Israel." Wow. And Jonathan it takes off and says, "This is the prince's robe. This is your robe. This is the prince's sword. It's your sword. This is the prince's armor. It's yours. And the belt and the bow, all of it. He's given him everything because Jonathan understood something that no one else did at the time. And that was that David was the next anointed king. How incredible is that to come from the very person who was supposed to be the next king? Are you with me? How powerful, how incredible. What a sign to David, who is sitting there and in one day just kills Goliath, and then the guy who should hate him knits his soul to him and says, "Take my armor." God's hand is on David, and Jonathan sees it and passes the test. He set aside his plans and ambitions for the Lord. I can only hope I have the wisdom and humility to recognize what God is doing and that I am not the most important piece of his purpose. We say something at church, we say that we're going to build below you, beside you, and above you. And that below and beside I'm all about. The above stinks. You're going to build above me? There will be a day where we have to build above me. And I'm not the right guy for the job anymore, whatever job that is. And that's going to hurt. Do I have the same mentality, the humility, and the closeness with God to recognize when it's time for me to back away and let someone else go? Do you? What an amazing thing. And it gets even more fascinating. Ask yourself this question. Is this the first time that day that someone has tried to give armor to David? Who else did? Saul. If you know the story, earlier that day before David defeated Goliath, Saul comes up to him and says, "Hey, you're going to fight Goliath. Take my armor." I don't know if it was felt guilty or what, but David said, "No, I can't take it because I'm not familiar with it." And also I think it's because he knew that's the king's armor. I'm not the king. But later, Jonathan in the same day says, "Take my armor." Must have been awkward for Saul. And David said, "Okay, I'll take it." He puts it on. How incredible. David could receive Jonathan's armor not because Jonathan, let me just breathe. Talking too fast, aren't I? Nancy, am I talking too fast? Okay, all right. David could receive Jonathan's armor, but not Saul's, because Jonathan was of one mind, one spirit, and having the same love. He was like, "We can do this because we're the same." Let's finish the story because there's this other guy named Saul who has a very opposite reaction, doesn't he? Verse 6, it says this, "And as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and songs of joy and with musical instruments." No wonder this guy had a big head and had an ego complex, because people are singing songs about him all the time. I mean, get this. "And when the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down the thousands and David his 10,000s. Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. And he said, 'They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom?' And Saul eyed David from that day on." How long did Saul get to celebrate the victory over the Philistines and David and Goliath? A day? Because as soon as he heard the songs, he was like, "Nope, not okay with it." In fact, Saul tries to kill David by, it says, throw a spear at him and pin him to the wall twice. It's a lot for a 15, 16-year-old kid, right? He tries to send David on these suicide missions to kill all these Philistines, and yet God prevails and David prevails because of God's favor, and he comes back. Later, it's not working, so Saul tries to ensnare David by having him marry his daughter, Michal. But then Michal loves David more than him. Over and over again, Saul is actively trying to fight against what God is doing. Saul is unwilling to accept that God was going to use someone else to be king. Think about this. Saul could have been the most incredible mentor. Saul could have recognize what God is doing, and if you know the end of, well, you know what? No spoilers. We're going through it, right? You don't know what happens to Saul. Find out later. Come back next week. When Saul saw that God was using someone else, he couldn't handle it. I want to tell you guys a really quick story, then we're going to finish. This is a picture of the early days of the Grove. We had a sound booth like right over there, and it was fun. It was crazy. Does anyone remember the red chairs? Love the blue ones. So much better. And we met in this same space. And in the early days of the Grove, we don't have much staff. My dad's just working his tail off. And there's this girl who comes and decides to start helping my dad. It's really awesome. She's just volunteering. And I remember talking on my phone with my dad, and he said that, man, this girl's a godsend. She's helping him all this stuff and with all these events, and it's really great. And he was so thankful. But as the church grew, this girl was just a volunteer, and her husband and my dad started to get worried it was too much for her. And so they said, hey, you look exhausted. We can't thank you enough. We want to just take you and split up what you're doing and have you just do one of these 2 or 3, like just share some of the responsibility. She said, no, I got it. So they waited, and a couple more months later, man, this girl's struggling. Balls are starting to drop, right? So finally, my dad said, no, we're going to take some stuff and give it to someone else. And she said, I don't want to serve at all anymore. And don't think that we're all that different. And you know those people who are like, if I can't lead it, I don't want to do it. You're looking at one of them. It's great when you work for your dad. Like, I struggle so much with this because I think I have the same temptation that if I'm not in charge, I don't want to support. And yet, Jonathan didn't do that. It's incredible. Can I confess something to you? When I read this story, I kept wanting to make myself David, but the truth is I'm Jonathan. The truth is I'm not David. I look at David and he's killing the 10,000s. It's all exciting, and I'm like, I want to be that guy. I want to be the leader. I want to be the king. I want to be the guy. But if you know anything about Christianity, that we have a guy. We have a king, and it's not us. It's not me. It's certainly not me. It's Jesus. And there's a central theme woven throughout all of 1st and 2nd Samuel, and it's my second point today, is my last point. We must put down our own desires to be king and put Jesus as Lord of our lives. And I'm just blown away. I can just tell you, just to peel back the curtain on some of the wickedness in my own life. I often see other churches incredibly successful, and I'm happy but jealous. I often know other people my age who are pastoring their own, you fill in the blank, and the human nature in me goes, well, I wish I was doing that. Why can't I be doing that? They're doing the 10,000s. What are my measly thousands over here? Can you imagine killing thousands? I mean, it actually sounds like a really weird question. But like that's pretty successful if you're a military leader. Saul was successful, but he wasn't as successful as David, and so he just couldn't handle it. I'm going to make a point, and I'm not sure it's true. But I'm willing to bet there will always be someone about 10 times better than you at whatever you care deeply about in your life. And now, that's not true for everybody, but certainly for me, it'll always be true. There will always be someone 10 times better because that's just how it works. There's always someone better. There's always someone more money, more success, more important. You fill in the blank. And yet in Christianity, we're not called to grapple for that control and grapple for that authority, but rather to turn it over to the Lord. I can think of many people in the history of our church as I've been here who came with different agendas, their own agendas. And when it came to bring it alongside the agenda of the church, they just couldn't be a part of it. So they had to leave because they just couldn't come alongside of one heart, of one mission to someone else. If they just couldn't be in charge, they just couldn't do it. Will you guys stand? I want to review really quick. The gospel is more powerful to bring people together. There's nothing more powerful to bring people together like love and devotion to Christ. The gospel is stronger than anything that seeks to divide. In fact, this is the crazy thing, and it's the thesis statement of today. The gospel is so powerful that it causes us to give up the grappling of control over our own life and recognize Christ as our King. So here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to end. Maybe today you can relate to me. This has been one of the single most convicting messages I've ever written because I struggle. I want to be David, not Jonathan, and I think I relate more to Saul here than Jonathan. and it hurts. And maybe that's you. Maybe you struggle being the support person. Maybe you struggle getting behind other people's visions and mission because you just want it to be your mission and your vision and your plan and your idea. And I just think that we won't make it very far with a lot of those types of personalities and a lot of people like Saul. But if we all became Jonathan and stopped grappling for control of who can lead, but rather look to the Lord to lead and said, Lord, what are you doing? What can we do for you? We can start pulling in the same direction. Instead of fighting each other, we can look towards Jesus and imagine the momentum of us all humbling ourselves, not being offended because people got built above us or things got taken from us or other people did different things or we had to move in a different direction or we're just stacking chairs or you fill in all the different arguments that we hear. But just imagine if we, church, looked to the Lord to lead us and said, God, I will submit, I will humble myself, whatever it takes. I will take off the desire to make myself king, and I'll give it to you and say, Lord, you're king of my life. Here's what we're going to do. We would love to pray for you in a minute. We're just going to worship, and I want to worship this way. Actually, I'll tell you, first I want to tell you what we're going to pray for. If you want prayer for anything at all, in your life in any way, we'd love to pray with you. But particularly if you're looking for good community and friendships, and you're just like, man, I'm looking for friends, we want to pray with you for that this morning. We want to come alongside you and lift you up. Maybe you have friends, but you're looking for deep friendships, like kinship, like a love for one another, where you feel so close, best friends. Maybe you want to help your friends become best friends, and you want to pray for that this morning. We'd love to pray for you. Or maybe you're like me, and man, you can harbor bitterness and resentment when other people succeed. Or when other people do things and it goes well, and you just get jealous. We want to pray for you this morning too. Or maybe you want prayer for anything else, we'd love to pray for you. So as soon as we're done praying, don't miss out on God wanting to do business with you this morning. And the last thing is this, I want us to worship the Lord. I feel like the Lord wants us to worship him with one mind and one accord. That recognize that there's something powerful when it says where two or more are gathered. And we're going to worship the Lord with love and zeal for him as one body and one church united under the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so let's do that this morning. I'm going to pray, and then as soon as I'm done praying, go get prayer or let's worship. Dear Jesus, we love you. You're so good, and we humble ourselves before you, and we thank you for your great and mighty gift that is the gospel to unite us, Lord. And so we want to be a united church under your banner as you as our King. We praise you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's worship.
Hey guys, thanks so much for checking out the Grove Church YouTube channel. We pray this channel is a great resource for you to know God and to make him known to the people around you. But even more, we would love for you to be in person with us here on Sundays. So if you go to our website at sdgrove.org, you can find out more about us and check out our service times. Also, stay in tune with everything happening at the Grove. Click on that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you don't miss doing church with us here live on Sunday mornings when you can't make it in person. And if you enjoyed that message that you heard today and it blessed you, click on that message playlist button that's on your screen right now to view all of our previous messages that will help you grow in your faith so much. God bless you guys and have a great week.